Warning, you are about to hear a discussion that may make you uncomfortable. I say good. It will be raw, it will be real, but it's today's reality about the landscape surrounding the sex trade, sexual exploitation, trauma in America. And you know what? I feel like it's becoming escalated and normalized in society, but not on Melissa Kaiser's watch because she is a warrior. I want everybody to meet Melissa. I'm so thankful she's here. I've been waiting a while to speak with her. Such a busy schedule, doing such great work across our country. She's a licensed social worker, specializing, her expertise is anti human trafficking efforts, team development, addressing all kinds of things, traumatic stress. We talk a lot on the Warriors about trauma because I don't think people really understand what it is and that it has lifelong effects on people. And also law enforcement, wellness, healthfulness for everybody. And Melissa has dedicated her career advocating for victims, survivors, strengthening system responses, equipping professionals with knowledge, tools necessary, meaningful change in communities. And that is our hashtag, Melissa. Community creates change at the Warriors. So you are the perfect candidate. So I am going to have, because I could sit here all day and read your extensive bio.
Oh,
I'm having
gosh.
everything, all your points of contact, everything you do in the body of the video, because I want to get right to it with you. So
Okay.
welcome, Melissa Kaiser, to the Warriors.
Thank you. My gosh, you're making me blush over here with that intro. Thank you.
Listen, let me just add something. I do think two important points, and again, I'm going to put it all in the body of the video, is you are serving as Director of Advocacy for the National Child Protection Task Force, very important, and also a member of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC, we call it around here, Family Advocacy Network, two most important groups. We've got to give you gold stars for that and point that out. And the rest has to wait because it's too extensive. We don't have time for that. But I want to thank you. But I want to start with one thing. I want to kind of digress here. Tell us something about Melissa, or Mel, as I like to call you. My own. That it can be anything about where you grew up or why you became a social worker, but just something maybe like nobody knows about you. That would be good. Spill a little tea, as we like to say, or something.
Ooh, I love spilling tea. Well, some things that surprise people would be that I grew up on a beef ranch in North Dakota.
Really?
So that, yes. So I've only been in Florida for about 3.5 years, but prior to that, my entire life was in North Dakota, and have been working on the international trafficking movement for about 3.5 years. But prior to that, it was very specific to North Dakota and the grassroots where I grew up. And then with social work, a story I do tell when people ask in my trainings is I read a book called A Child Called It by Dave Pelzer when I was about 14, and I couldn't put it down, and I was not a big book reader at that age. And so when I was done, I was like, how do we help kids like this? Because it talks about his horrific abuse at the hands of his mother. And my mom was like, you might want to be a social worker. And I had never even heard that term before. And so it was literally that day that I knew I wanted to be a social worker. And so prior to the trafficking space, I worked in a variety of areas of social work, whether, youth homelessness, addiction, psychiatric, treatment, foster care work. I did some some time at like a halfway house and juvenile detention. So kind of all over the place, which all were very similar to or coincide with the trafficking world, of course, because so many victims come from that type of history. So it all kind of blends together in some way. But those are some fun facts. I don't know how much tea that is more than fun facts, but
I like that, finding out about how you grew up. That's very interesting, actually. Because
yes.
I don't know anybody that grew up like in South Dakota and beef ranches and all this thing.
Yeah. Well, I could do a whole presentation on raising cattle. If anyone is ever interested in that, we could throw that on here too.
Actually, I think we should, but we'll do that for another program.
Yeah, now, sounds great.
No, because it's very interesting. I bet you a lot of young people might be interested in that, as a matter of fact. So we got to think out of the box, Melissa. We got to think. Now, let me jump in with the first question. So you've been training now professionals across the country. I want to ask you, very direct, what is the most shocking gap you've seen? Perhaps how law enforcement and service providers are responding to child trafficking. What are you hearing, seeing? What are you being told?
I think in general, not shocking to anybody, the social media piece has been huge, especially with youth. And how do we stop it? How do we have conversations? So there's a lot around that. I think there are some gaps there. I also think there's still a lot of missing conversations around males, whether youth or adults, and missing conversations around labor trafficking. So all of it's important. All of it is crucial and critical, regardless of the type of trafficking and the sex and gender and age. But there's still, I think, a lack of conversation in some of those areas. And I would say too, the collaborative piece in some areas is incredible. And in some areas there, it is non-existent, where people don't know their partner agencies, don't know the local resources, or are frustrated with a partnership or an organization or an agency. And so they just don't talk to them. And so a lot of the training I do revolves around collaboration and team building, as well as some of still just the basics around trafficking. But I really focus a lot on approaches to working with victims, especially in the law enforcement space. I think people get overwhelmed with, or maybe a lack of confidence with working with victims. And there are some really simple tips and tools and resources that anyone can do. Anyone can be therapeutic in how they interact with people. And so just giving people some confidence and skills that you can talk to these individuals, you can work with them, and here are some ways that you can do that anyone is capable of doing. And for some victims, not surprising, it's as simple as just smiling when you say hi to them and making them feel human, making them feel comfortable. And so any one of us can do that. And so a lot of my conversations are really tailored around some of that basic stuff that we overlook all the time.
Yeah, just humanize it. It sounds simple,
Yeah.
but just put that human touch on it.
Mm-hmm.
It is so interesting to me that I see such disconnect,
Yeah.
and I don't really, because there are solutions, you offer them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think that is? Especially now, I feel like more than, I'll say, the last 5 years, 6 years since I started all of this, there are a lot of organizations, right? There are a lot of nonprofits, individuals, seems to me, so many talking about human trafficking, sex trafficking. I like that you brought up labor trafficking, because I think it's something that we don't ever speak enough about.
Mm-hmm.
I'm convinced. I'm convinced people think, now this is going to sound a little, I think people like to say sex trafficking sometimes. Well, we know the media does, because it sounds
Yeah.
sexy.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not kidding, as opposed to, because I keep adding in labor trafficking, and
Mhm.
it's always about sex trafficking kind of thing.
Yeah.
So we have to remember about the labor, right?
Mhm.
Kind
Well,
of
and they
thing.
go hand in hand sometimes.
Well, that's just it.
They can be totally two completely different things. But a lot of the victims I've worked with, there was, not only sex trafficking, but they were in massage parlors. They were drug mules for
Yes.
the trafficker. There's other components. At the same time, people still confuse, which I understand when you're not in the space every day. They confuse labor trafficking with smuggling. And so a lot of times I just break down, smuggling is a crime against a border. Labor trafficking is a crime against a human. And then breaking down, smuggling, oftentimes it's an agreed upon relationship, whereas trafficking, it's not, right? One is consensual, one is not typically. And so just breaking down some of that is helpful. But federally, I know that there's a push to focus more on labor trafficking with the funds that are provided now to task forces around the country. So that's been a really great change to see that I know for grants specifically, there had to be pieces in grants that people were specifically laying out their plan for working with labor trafficking victims and resources for such. So that's a good move forward.
That's a piece of hope. We like that,
Yeah.
a piece of hope. But I'm also thinking, Melissa, like sex trafficking could really also be considered labor trafficking. You're forced into doing this. I don't want to call it a job. You're forced into this, right? The force, fraud, coercion, we keep hearing as the definition. It's kind of all blending together.
I agree.
So we have to talk more about that. Now, let me ask you about, because I'm here in New York. I don't think most of the law enforcement really understands what to do. That's one piece of it. If they encounter a victim, right? They're kind of by the book. The second piece of that is there's very little full, like, protocol, I guess I would call it.
Yeah.
If you do encounter somebody, like, what's the next step? Where do you put them? Where's the safe housing? We do have a great mutual friend, Dave Weiss, Brooklyn DA's office. He has a wonderful human trafficking unit. I will say in New York, they are doing good work, right?
Yeah, agreed.
But for instance, not many others are. I can speak about New York right now. What would you say about with law enforcement? How are we going to get in there? Because you do the trainings. Is it a
Mhm.
matter of just getting like yourself in there to make them understand? Because turning around this justice system, I'm finding very tough. I talk to a lot of judges behind the scenes, and they're like, they understand things need to change, but they're
Mhm.
doing it still by the book. And it doesn't
That's a
work
great
anymore,
question.
you know?
Yeah. No, I see a few, I guess, setbacks in that area. One, I would say I've worked with and trained incredible law enforcement. The issues stem from either they literally just don't know who to call. So they can get all the training in the world, but when they bring that back to their community, it's okay, I think I see something. But I call my supervisor and they disagree, or they want me to arrest
Yeah.
this person for prostitution, or they don't have the training. Or it's, I literally don't know what resource advocate mentorship program, like I don't know who's supposed to be contacted when I do interact with the victim, like on my beat, right? If I
Right.
just come across something. So I see a lot of still like lack of leadership buy-in, and it might not be from the top. It might be the kind of middle people that are supervising that don't necessarily see, understand, make time for. I also see the struggle with seeing the same victims pop up often, whether sex or labor trafficking, and that frustration with just the response of law enforcement not having that trauma-informed understanding, and that's not their fault, but to know why would someone relapse? Why isn't someone leaving the life? And so starting to view them or see them as a criminal, because oftentimes when you have victims, they're forced into other crimes, right? Or the lifestyle in general comes in the territory of other criminal activity. And so law enforcement, that's the lens they have, is there's a crime being committed, I need to respond to that. And then there's just push and pull between, well, I know they're a victim. However, this is the third time I've encountered them.
Right.
What am I supposed to do? And so I think it's sometimes not necessarily the first interaction, but maybe the second, third, fourth, or a lack of understanding around trauma that I might ask, as a cop, I might say, do you want help? And I might get yelled at in return,
Yes.
and helping them understand why that might be, right? That's a trauma response. That's a fear thing. They've had bad interactions with those of us in these professions already, right? We don't understand their history. So the list goes on and on. But ultimately, what I see consistently is that I go back to my community and I don't know who to call in the moment. What am I supposed to do at that time? What are you saying? What would you say?
I have got 50 ideas going around my head.
Mhm.
You're making me swirl here. You're making me swirl right off my chair. I see a lot of things. I see, again, I'm speaking a lot about New York, what I see firsthand, kind of boots on the
Yeah.
ground. I see a lot of our law enforcement kind of desensitized,
Yep,
not,
absolutely. Yeah.
not, I actually think they've told me actually, a lot of them behind the scenes, like they suffer from trauma
Hmm.
also, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
Working as many do working in this arena, I will say, right? It's tough, right? Especially things with children, tough. Um, and so maybe I'm thinking it's twofold. They're desensitized, right,
Yeah.
to all of this. And then also, again, as I mentioned, because I hear it all the time, we don't have that next step. We don't have
Hmm.
that piece in place.
Correct.
And
Yeah.
so
Or the right
that's
next
what.
step. The
Right.
right.
So,
Yeah.
exactly. So
Yeah.
therefore, if they encounter, like you said, the person for the third or fourth time, right, put them in jail, do kind of on to the next. And I'm not
Yeah.
blaming them. Like
Right.
there's no system really set up. That's what I don't understand. Like, what can't we have some uniform system? Or you're
Hmm.
doing it. It
Trying.
seems like
I certainly am.
across every state, because if we all had
Yeah.
everything like kind of the same steps, more or
Yep.
less, and we had
Yeah.
that cheat sheet, I call it a cheat
Hmm.
sheet, like because like you said, people don't like even know what to do. Sort of, we had
Hmm.
bullet points or something, and we could all be on the same page and have some success. It would be empowering, I
It
think.
would be. And to your point, I've made a ton of protocols, and at the core of it, it's like the same things. It's just in your community, finding the pieces and the players
Right.
to plug into that. And that can be the hard part, is it's not always leadership, or it's not always the agency it's supposed to be. It's like, who are the champions in your community? Who's going to take this on? Who's the right provider? Because you might have a million available placement facilities, treatment center options, mentors, but they're not the right fit for that person, for that situation. And a lot of them still don't understand trafficking. And, they're supposed to be a trauma informed agency, but then victims get kicked out for having trauma reactions or responses. And so that's kind of my rub with it too, is pushing back
Mhm.
on that a bit, but also having been in the system, I absolutely understand some of the struggles that they're having, and I can empathize with that. The thing with law enforcement too that I kind of push back or challenge with the arrest, because you're right, a lot of it is the wellness piece or the burnout piece too, and the being just fatigued of giving compassion all the time, right? But if this were a drug situation, right, a drug bust, you have a buyer, you have a seller, right, and then you have the product. Right. So in trafficking, you have a buyer and your seller, and you have the product. The product just happens to be a human instead of drugs. So in the drug circumstance, we can't arrest the drugs. We cannot arrest the product in a drug bust. We have to go for the buyers and the sellers to crush the market, right? Or to change the market. So over here, why is our goal to arrest the product, thus leaving the buyers and the sellers to continue the market and find more product, right? Which happens to be more human lives. And so I understand there are certain times when it's appropriate. And I have worked with survivors who said the best thing for me was to get arrested. Yes. That can be the right step. But until you're trauma informed, trauma sensitive, understand the resources, give those resources, the right ones, some room for partnership with you, right? And develop a protocol and response, knowing you're going to have trial and error. It's really about getting creative and pushing outside the norm in the box of what we do. And there's so many assumptions we make about the system, not sitting down at the table and saying, let's talk about the white elephants. Let's talk about what doesn't work, right? It's okay to have those conversations, because at the core of it, the only people who suffer are those in the community who need us most when we're not taking the responsibility to fix what's broken. And like you said, I do think there can easily be some uniformity across the country with some differences in bordering communities, with some reservations, right? Because there's differences on reservations in the human trafficking codes and the resources. But ultimately, I do think something like that could be potentially successful.
Yes, and you're at the lead. You're at the forefront of that. I'm putting it all on you too, because you have.
I will take it on. I absolutely will.
But here's the thing, Melissa. You're very easy to understand. You're very relatable. I'm sure you've heard all this already. You're talking truth and facts, right? Yeah. And you have solutions. So why wouldn't everybody take you up on everything? Like, this is where we have to go with all of this. But I want you to describe for our warriors trauma. I've been continually called in the media to talk about the Diddy case, right? Of course, any question, Melissa, I ever asked about Diddy, I flip it into survivors and victims. And I just don't even answer the question. I do my answer the way, but people know I do that, but that's what I do. I don't think people understand with that case, a lot of it. And I had to do something today, and the lawyers were saying, oh, well, she went back for more. They do not understand traumatized minds or a vulnerable person. Or give us a definition. What is your definition of trauma?
Oh, that's a loaded question, but a great one. I think with the trauma with these victims, it's more around the trauma bond or the Stockholm syndrome piece of trauma. And it's focusing on, instead of why don't they leave, why can't they leave? Because we know that they can't, whether it's domestic violence or trafficking, they do continually go back. So let's figure out the why there. And so for me, when you're focusing on it from the trauma bond lens, there's a perceived threat to one's safety, and that the person will follow through with said threat. And so you have the option of either risking going against that person, right? Thinking that they're going to go through with that threat, or you bond to them so you know that will not happen. And the threat can be things like, I know where your family lives, I'll kill your pets, I'll ruin your reputation, I'll ruin your finances, I'll make sure your kid never sees you again. I have control of all your bank accounts. I will kill you, right? I mean, there's so many perceived threats and or real, because they've seen those traffickers or those offenders do those things. My options are bond with offender to make sure those things don't happen to my loved ones or to me, or risk that by leaving and then see what happens to me and or my reputation, my life, my people I care about's life. And so people have a hard time putting themselves in someone else's shoes. And I think what we do instead of empathizing is we compare what we think we would do to a victim in a situation that none of us can fathom, right? That haven't experienced that. And so to assume we wouldn't comply or do those things, I think is very short-sighted and truly devastating, because these victims are not leaving. And so let's figure out why and work on the why are we victim blaming, right? Still, why are we still in this state of victim blaming when these horrific people are existing and doing horrific things? Like, why can't that just be the focus instead of, well, why do they keep going back? Why is this person doing horrific things, right? It just blows my mind that that isn't the focus here. Ever really, when it comes to some of these cases. I shouldn't say ever. That's very cynical of me. Talk about burnout, but you get my point,
No, but you're speaking the truth. I mean, what it is. I mean, even not to dwell on Diddy, but these were women who wanted careers, most of them either, to be a performer or a singer or to advance in one of his businesses. Everybody thought he was so super successful. And then they were kind of blackballed in the industry. So they couldn't get jobs. Some of them were mothers. They had kids, so they had to go back because they were trying to make money to put food on the table. And I try to explain these things to people who simply really refuse to understand how this, and again, it's that victim blame. It's that same playbook, right? And none of us can, unless we're in their shoes. So we're trying to change that with society. That's another one too. We're working on. So I hope this case will shed some light and bring some sort of conclusion. We have 5 more weeks of that trial, and we'll have some accountability in that. But let me ask you about. We talk all the time, raising awareness. How do we move? How do we move from the hashtags, panels, which we've all been on, and I say this very respectfully, just into real world, boots on the ground, community creates change, prevention. I'm very worried about our kids.
Yeah.
All about this. The ages are getting younger and younger.
Oh, yeah.
And
tell me about it. I think there's a variety of things. I think if we're talking about, let's start just in the home, right? If we're going to peel it all back and say, what are we doing in our homes? Something I harp on all the time, which makes people uncomfortable, but my daughter is 2.5, and some of the first words she could say were penis and vagina. And people, especially being from the Midwest, that made them really uncomfortable. And I'm like, if you understood the world that I came from, that would make sense to make kids comfortable in their bodies, make kids comfortable talking about their bodies, talking about sex in their home with their parent. I want my kid to know and learn those things from me versus making it a taboo thing. Because if I teach them it's not okay to talk about those things, what's going to happen when, God forbid, something happens to my kid, your kid, and now they've been taught, that shame already associated with, your body parts are bad words, and we don't talk about sex in the home, right? So for me, it's in the home, starting those conversations. It's having supper together when you can at night, without phones, right? It's having cell phones that specifically keep kids safe. It's learning the things they like. If they do have access to a phone and get video games, learn those things with your kids. Show interest in the things that they like, right? And make it a comfortable thing, but also supervise every single piece of that device and of their relationship, so on and so forth. So that's kind of one area we could really go into. I think so many people want to put it on the schools, and I understand, because where else do kids get education, prevention, and awareness? But, when I've had conversations with many schools about this, it's like, what else can we possibly take on, right? They have curriculum, they have things they have to fit in. And so there's just this push and pull between, we know that the kids who need it in the home aren't going to get it in the home, and where on earth else does it come in? But money for prevention, I think, is huge, both prevention for boys and girls. I think those can be the same, but I think they look different. I used to run a prevention group for girls who were at risk of trafficking, and they had already been trafficked and exploited. I mean, every girl I worked with through that curriculum who was in juvenile detention, it's too late, right? This at-risk curriculum where we say, these girls are showing these signs, it's too late. So what are we just going to start preventing in general for all sexes? And then I think we have to look at, like what we've talked about, protocols. How do we put our own stuff aside in our turf issues, our historical frustrations, and say, we need to sit down as a community, because it's not about any of us, our egos, our funding. It's about actually caring about the victims we say we serve, right? And saying, what are we doing to ensure they do not continue to fall through the cracks? Because every community has gaps. It's up to every community to sit down together and say, what are we going to do here? Or if we don't have have the solution, right? And thinking outside the box to bring solutions to the issues that we continue to just say, we don't have that, or we don't know, right? So that's a very long answer, but I could go on with that forever.
No, it's real. It's really people. Melissa, I used to kind of skirt around this because, there's parental autonomy, and I
Mhm.
never want to be judgy, right?
Yeah,
But then I decided maybe 6 months ago, if you buy your child a device, you really have a responsibility
you
to
do.
talk to
Absolutely.
them, educate
Mhm.
yourself, talk to your child, put some kind of guardrails, whatever, you see fit, to really keep up, because even you and me, every day things are popping up. It is really
Mhm.
hard, right? So if you're a mom or a dad, a family, and you're trying to, pay the bills and go to school and go to work, things get overlooked, right? So
Mhm.
we understand all that, but there is so much good information out there, what you're
Oh,
talking
so much.
about. Or
There's so much.
there's so much for free. Like we always try to provide as
Mhm.
much free, where to go to get education about apps and things like that.
Yeah,
So I want the public to have, access to those resources and understand there's so many, but
yeah.
it starts with you. You
Mhm.
have to take the time. These are our precious kids. And as far as such hangups about, you know, nude bodies and sex, and I'll say, and when I'm speaking, they're seeing things on their phones anyway. Like
Yeah,
they've grown up 30 and under this digital kind of internet bubble. So you might as well just talk about it and
right.
be the teacher. But I have to tell, it's very strange that people about that issue, they're like, I don't want to open the can of worms. I'm like, the can's open. They're
It is.
exchanging nude images because all the teachers at different schools tell me they've been
Mhm.
exchanging nude images like Pokemon cards. They're just,
Right. And if they
so like,
haven't, their friend has. They're seeing it. It's normalized. So
right.
wouldn't you have rather have control over those conversations and make sure that your kid knows they can come to you with that,
Yes.
And sometimes they still might not, and you might do all the things in the world. But to your point, the
Right.
amount of resources, not only for parents in the home, for schools, for communities, for protocol development. I mean, there's so many free things out there that anyone can utilize for a variety of things, right? And I just think there's so much responsibility that we all can take on in making it safer and having these conversations. And so the tools are there, the things are there to make
Yes.
it happen. It's just the time and the people and the effort and the passion for getting it done.
Yeah, you heard that, warriors. Roll up your sleeves. You got to apply a little elbow grease here. But I think, Melissa, no, we really live, I'm going to say even just in the last year, a really new world, a new country. This is the way
Yeah.
I look at it. And
Mhm.
it's time for everybody must. Like, you have to do something. We can't put it on the schools. Our kids can't read and
Mhm.
write. In most of the schools, they're trying to get back on track with that. However, the good news is we have a lot of states now, towns, cities working on phone free in the classrooms. New York just signed on. We're going to start next season, bell to bell. You cannot have, I don't know, nobody seems to know yet how they're accomplishing this, but our
Mhm.
governor is designating 23 million. I also question that because I'm like, I don't think that's enough for the whole state of New York. Do we have
Yeah.
yonder pouches? Are we going to have cubbies in each classroom?
Mhm.
Is it going to be checked at the door? Uh, they still don't have that plan.
Next
Okay,
step.
that's
Sure.
another problem. It's great to say,
Yeah.
we're going to put money, because I asked teachers too, and then they're like, we're not hearing about it. We don't know what the plan is.
Mhm.
But at least it's a start because it is working where we do
Yeah,
have it across the country and some other places. So this is all hopeful and a good start.
it
I want,
is. Yeah.
yeah, no, there's a lot of great positive news. I mean, we're talking to each other, on a computer. You're in
Right.
Florida, I'm in New York, sharing great information. You have great information with all of the work you do. But let me ask you about, um, as Director of Advocacy for the National Child Protection Task Force. What trends right now? What's emerging? What can we tell our warriors to keep an eye on? Um, Everybody should be on high alert, I think, for all these issues. But
Mhm.
there's so much, and my fear, Melissa, always is: there's what do people do when there's too much? They close the door, they close their
Yeah.
eyes, they don't look at anything. Give us one or two things right now that parents should be looking at, or family members, because I like to point out families today are made up not always a mom and dad. You could have an aunt raising a grandma, older
Mhm.
siblings are raising kids. We have a lot of different dynamics here in New York. But what are some of the things for high alert right now?
I think kids having more than one account on the same platform. So you might assume they just have the one that you're seeing, but oftentimes they might have two, three accounts on, on Instagram or on these other things. So looking for that, right? I would guess that for me is like the bigger one I'm seeing now. I think too, I'm so much into social media, but this is kind of odd, but bear with me. Like, think about it in the eyes of an offender. Hopefully most of us, if not all of us, have no idea how to do that. But in terms of where would you want to be as an offender, and start looking at it from that lens. Like, I want to be on video gaming platforms. I'm going to be on Roblox. I'm going to be right in these places where young kids and or teenagers, and sometimes even adults who are vulnerable, spend time, but trying to view it from that way of like, well, app is made for middle schoolers. It's got to be safe. Well, where would an offender want to create a profile and be? And so try to view it from that perspective, I think, is helpful too. And also making sure there are not hidden things in kids' phones. There's calculator apps that look like the regular calculator on the phone, but you type in a password and it brings up an entirely different side of their phone. And you might think, not my kid, right? We all do that. And of course, good kids sometimes hide things, right? I was a good kid. I hid things from my parents too. It's just part of being a teenager. And so looking at what else could exist here that maybe I'm missing or I'm not spending enough time on.
Yeah. And really, and what do you recommend to them? Where should they go to do this? I mean, obviously they can come to you. We're going to have all your, information listed. The Warriors, I'm always listing things out because that's the question I get to a lot. So what do I do? And that's why I'm always like, well, you can come on the Warriors website and look at some things.
Yeah.
And we have to remember always to give, unfortunately, like easy lifting. We have to hand people, because again, they're not going to do the work really. Kind of thing. But I'm glad you brought that up about try to put oneself in like a predator's shoes, even though it sounds horrible. Interesting you said that, because I just had a friend of mine. She works in this area, and she said to me, what's missing in all this? I'm like, a lot's missing, but what? She's like, we talk about the kids, or we talk as adults. We don't really like talk with the kids too much. I mean, there are some people doing that, but really like taking their feelings into account, getting them involved. And I've started in the last year going into schools. And it's very basic. It's like I let them lead the way.
Yeah,
Kind of
absolutely.
thing. Let them tell me, once they trust me, this strange woman coming in to talk about digital safety. But they're very smart. And I do 6th, 7th, and 8th grades, right? The kids are incredibly smart. They all say, no, I don't answer DMs. Oh, no. But we know from all the studies, things are going on, right? That can't, they're in a group. So, of course, they're going to be brave and all that. But what do you think what do you think about that concept? We need more also talking directly with the kids groups. I mean, just tell me about that a little bit, because we got the adults kind of covered, right? You're doing everything with law enforcement. We're doing all that. We're trying with teachers as much as we can, but again, they're overwhelmed. It's not really kind of their job. Although I'd like to see, to be honest with you, mandatory programs in schools. I think that's we've got all kinds of sex things going on here in New York. Why can't we? This is part of it. This is a big deal right now. But what do you think about the kids? What can we do to get them to open up more and have them lead us?
I mean, at the core of it, empowerment. There's nothing that was more powerful with the hundreds of kids I worked with simply empowering them. And that could be a variety of things. That is getting their opinion, making sure they feel like the expert, having them, again, teach you about their video games, and giving them space to be self-confident, make decisions for themselves, make their own choices, work through things with them in a way that they feel empowered, because that builds so much confidence. I think one of the most favorite parts of what I developed in my multidisciplinary team approach, and it took some struggling conversations, for lack of better description, on allowing kids and adults to be at their team meeting. And that sounds really silly, but there are so many meetings that we have to discuss kids in a variety of different capacities for a variety of different situations, right? Or exploitation or abuse circumstances. But where do we make time for kids and adults who are the victims to be at the center of that meeting? And so part of the struggle was confidentiality, and we have things we need to discuss without that victim there, because other, cases or things might be involved, or there's pieces of the investigation. Yeah, absolutely. But it is still their meeting and we're still talking about that individual. And so whether we would start or end with them present, I just push back on that system to say, this is their meeting. Would you want a meeting of people talking about you? And you have no, like, talk about distrust with the system and how anxiety provoking that we're supposed to assume these people are helping us, yet we don't even have a spot at the table. It just kind of blew my mind when I really dug into all this work. And so whether we started or ended with a youth or adult, I always offered if they would like to come to the meeting. They got to be introduced to every team member and come to as many meetings as they wanted. They got to know our roles on the team, what we were there to help with. And we gave them the floor to ask questions. We gave them the floor to say, what does justice look like to you? What do you want to see happen? Where would you like to go? Right? What are your frustrations right now? And they got the floor, and nothing was more beautiful and rewarding for me in my job than those moments of them seeing like,
Wow.
this whole team is here for me and like wants to meet me and wants to hear what I have to say. But isn't that what it's supposed to be? Right.
Yes.
So
yes. Wow.
try to find and take the time to empower them and give them space to be at the table, whether in your home or whether you're responding to them in a case, right? An investigation or with services. And it's all of our responsibility to do that, to take the extra time to do that.
Wow. I love that so much. I think I was on your website. Who knows? I get up at 4 a.m. I don't know when it was, yesterday or this morning. I'm not sure. It's all blending in, Melissa.
I hear you.
I saw the Post-it notes from your group. Do you know what I'm talking about? And one was like, you're so beautiful. Yes. And I almost started crying from these little, victims, right? Like, and they're writing you these little notes. And I thought, wow, you really like had a breakthrough with them. Like, we need to do more of that poster note kind of, what I mean by that, the overall with the kids. And between then and my friend telling me, you know what we don't do? We don't really like get in there with the kids. So I'm so happy like to share what you're doing. And I think we need much more of that. What do you want to say anything about big tech? Any comments? That's another program too, but any comments right now with everything going on?
Oh my gosh, no pressure. I just hope I just hope they're taking it seriously. I hope they understand the severity of lives being lost, many, 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 many lives being lost. And there's a responsibility there to care, and we should care. I don't know how else to say it other than
you're too kind. You're far too kind.
Yeah. Well,
because I'll say it for you, or I'll say it. No, but history has proven they haven't stepped up, right?
Right.
They just haven't. Over and over. We've had proof. We've had whistleblowers. We've had studies. We've had stats. We have parents that have testified.
How many more parents, right?
So what else do we have to show? And I get the same question, Lynn, why does this happen? It's very crass, but the honest answer is because it's allowed and there's a lot of money to be made, right?
Yeah.
And then we could go into policy with Section 230, but we won't. They're allowed. They're a billboard. They're allowed, right? And so if nobody's stopping them, there's no accountability. Kids are the eyeballs. Kids are the product. So let's just keep going and we'll close our eyes. But it is like, how many more kids? How many more parents? And as a mother pointed out to me a few weeks ago, I never actually, Melissa, thought about it in this sense. She said, it's the whole family for the rest of our lives. It's not just, it's everybody in that household, the trauma,
forever.
The trauma forever. And there's nothing more powerful. And this person had testified in front of Congress. If big tech's in the room isn't moved by that, then we have to be the movers and the shakers, because
absolutely
they're not to be trusted. But we chip away, and the Take It Down Act is a great first piece of legislation. First one since 1998. I'm like, where's everybody been? 1998. But it's hopeful. It's good. Now we have Kids Online Safety Act reintroduced. I'm very confident that will be passed into legislation, and we have other things like Defiance Act. So at least we're talking about it. No, but at least we are, because we don't, it's like domestic violence, well, at least in New York, seems to be on top of, the trafficking kind of thing. I actually, Melissa, and I was floored when I heard this, and I had to go back and make sure I didn't like make it up. New York State designates 15 beds only for human trafficking.
Mhm.
Like everything's poured into domestic violence, even though
Mhm.
they intersect, right?
Yeah.
But it's like this mindset. So we're trying to separate it out. We'll have the separate human
Mhm.
trafficking, the separate domestic violence. But I heard 15 beds. Unheard
Yeah,
of in
and
2025, you know?
I know. And to your point, there's a few frustrations there. One, the funding for human trafficking specific shelters and beds, because there are issues when you combine the two at times. There are
Mm.
reasons why people in shelters and facilities have found out like we can't necessarily have them all together and there are differences. And so we want that separate space. So I think it's great that places are recognizing that they're different and they need separation for, in some situations. However, then where's the funding for that, right? And then how do you prioritize who gets what bed? And so much, I mean, that's the biggest thing I would say that's missing for trafficking is enough shelters, specific shelters who are trained in, understand, and only house human trafficking victims. And to your point on big tech, I don't remember, it's either NCMEC, FBI, or Thorn has the statistic on there's 500,000 pedophiles on the internet every day just in the United States. And again, I don't love stats when it comes to trafficking and stuff, so bear with me on that. But you get the idea, right? Of there's 500,000 offenders looking for kids on how many thousands of platforms every day in the United States. And to think that your kiddo is never going to be touched by that, or for big tech to think that there's not a responsibility there, baffles me, right? And
Yeah, I mean
Tim
that's what we
Tebow,
know about. That's what we know about 500. It could be five. It could be 5 million. Seriously, because as you
well,
know, this is all
exactly.
underreported in the dark. Who can keep up with it? I work with a lot of tech
Mhm.
people, so it's
I know
probably much more if
more.
that's what's
I
being
know.
reported.
Well,
How
and
do
Tim
you?
Tebow did a interview with Sean Ryan recently and he
Oh
brought a
yeah,
map, which I loved. And it was like 111,000 people in one day shared child sexual abuse material.
I
And again,
saw it.
yeah, I mean, and I'm just so thankful for someone like him having a platform to be able to
Yeah.
discuss those things so people see the severity of it. But anyway, I could go down that rabbit hole. And what were you just going to ask me that I
I
can
don't know. I forgot. I
get
was
off?
thinking about. I was thinking about. I saw the map with red little pinpoints
Yeah.
all over, and
Mhm.
it's just so. Look, I like to say all of this is kind of this big wheel with a lot of spokes, and the spokes all
Mhm.
make the wheel go around. There's so much to talk about, but we have to keep talking about it. We have to keep putting it in
Yes.
people's faces. We have to keep
Agreed.
really just raising this awareness.
Agreed.
But let me ask you, how do you describe when you're training? How do you
Mhm.
describe like grooming to law enforcement, or well, just tell me about grooming. How do you like recognize the signs of grooming,
Yeah, I mean,
coercion? It's such a big thing. I don't
right. I go
like
down a
how do
few.
schools miss? I know they have a duty to report, but they
Mhm.
kind of I work with schools. They'll be like, "Oh, we don't have a protocol in place. We don't really go there." I'm like, "You don't go there."
Right.
But then right. And then it's always about budgets. We don't have a budget. We
Mhm.
don't have the training kind of thing. Well, we got to
Mhm.
fix that. Law
I know.
enforcement, how the justice system in and of itself, you
Yeah.
know, what do we do about this grooming? Because now it's all over the place.
Yeah. I mean, there's a variety of things. I think specifically when we talk to kids as well, coercion can be a variety of different things. You can be coerced through love, right? You can be coerced
Yes.
through reputation. You can be coerced. There's so many different dynamics around what coercion is and why someone uses it and why it works. But with grooming, I talk a lot about vulnerabilities in general and with kids. I'll go through, like, for example, when I train on this, I'll go through a list and I'll say, someone who goes places unsupervised, someone who feels like people don't understand them, someone who fights with their family and friends, someone who has access to social media, someone who is interested in love. So, I'm like, who is this? And it's every kid. And so I really talk about, here are the vulnerabilities, which is every kid who ever existed. And this is what a trafficker's full-time job is to find that kid's specific vulnerabilities,
Yeah.
which we make pretty easy now with social media to find, right? Our vulnerabilities. And that's what they target them on. And Love 146 has a video I use all the time, where a daughter or a girl is like in her bedroom and a guy reaches out to her on Messenger, first like friends her, and she doesn't know him, but they have tons of mutual friends, right? So, well, I'll be a friend with this person. They keep messaging her and she's not responding. And then one day she's in her bedroom and her parents are fighting. And that's the time the guy reaches back out and says, "How are you?" And that's when she responds. Right. And so timing works out in the trafficker's favor when that's how they groom, they continue that. And I also talk about it, you know, you take the vulnerability and then how are they coercing you? So is it through drugs, parties? Is it through just someone to talk to? Is it through a ride from school, right? So there's something of value they are offering that child based on their life circumstances and their vulnerabilities. You don't even have to come from a bad home, right? The value could be someone's going to drive me to and from school in a cool car, right? So the vulnerability, the coercive kind of sexy luring, right? And then you get into the slow introduction to the space of if it's a female specifically, you're so pretty, right? You should just dance. You could just do this. You could, you know, let me take pictures of you. Let me go buy you some sexy dresses, right? And so that introduction slowly over time for a lot of youth, boys and girls, the introduction is slowly to pornography materials, right? Or touching over time. So there's all of these things that happen. And then once they're exploited, one thing I do when I present as well, and I cannot take credit for this, and I wish I knew the survivor's name, but she does a TED Talk where she does this. And it's something like, and I have my whole audience do this, and I always get the eye rolls, but I say, okay, everyone stand up, everyone hop on one foot, everyone raise your right arm. And again, I got this from the survivor from TED Talk. And then I say, sit down. And then I say, you've only known me for 20 minutes. Why did you just listen to what I told you to do? Well, you're in front of the room, you look harmless. What would have happened if we didn't comply with what you said? You know, we would have stuck out. Would you have said something to us? Would we have gotten in trouble? You know, I do this with kids too. Well, we would have gotten in trouble from our teacher if we didn't listen to you, right? So you can go down the list of why in that environment, in that dynamic, in that circumstance, why you would do what I told you to do. So when people say, well, why don't they leave? People don't consider what's going on in that person's environment around them that would make them go through with being exploited, right? When you go through the vulnerabilities and the grooming and the kind of sexy luring, when you get to the point of now you're going to be exploited, why does one do that, right? Why does it get to that point? And so it helps them understand every circumstance is different. Look what you just did in this environment, not knowing me. Also, I've worked with and seen victims who their trafficker has staged like a robbery. And maybe they're not their trafficker yet, but they're like their drug dealer. And so if they've given you drugs for free or helped you out now and again, and they stage like a robbery and getting beat up, and then they're like, you need to help me out here, right? I've helped you all this time, or I've given you free drugs. What are you going to do for me real quick? And this person might be withdrawing at this time. And so it's like, well, you have to have sex with my friend. And so that sounds maybe silly from someone on the outside, but I've worked a handful of cases where that's happened, or I know survivors in general from anywhere where that's part of their story. So grooming is a variety of ways and things.
A variety. I just want to get this. You may have heard about it. I work with some women and girls here in New York, and they were telling me about 2 months ago about the drizzle. Have you heard about this one? The drizzle? Melissa, I'm still trying to figure it out, but they know. So I'm like, okay, I don't know what this drizzle is. And they're like, you don't know? I'm like, no, I don't know about the drizzle. I haven't heard about it. I don't know about it. And it's usually a teen girl. And there's a guy in a very fancy car, all designer clothes, Gucci, Louis Vuitton, all this stuff. He kind of cozies up to the girl, right? We have girls 12, 13, 14 that are doing this. And they basically say, the guy will say, oh, okay, you want to be my girlfriend, hop in, blah, blah, blah. And these young girls are so taken, these children, because I'm really going to call them when you're 12, 13, 14, children. They're so taken with the fancy car and his wearing the fancy clothes that he will then say to them in a very short period of time, okay, if you want to be with me, you have to do this for me so I can keep looking like this. Yeah. So they're prostituting their own bodies. You're getting zero out of it, giving everything to this guy who's in control so he can wear designer clothes. And they're telling me there are a lot of young girls doing this.
Absolutely.
And they don't think twice about doing it. So that's like a whole nother thing. How do we empower, our girls, boys too, but girls and young women?
Well, and I'll tell you part of why that happens is as human beings, we want to be loved and we want to be accepted and we want to belong to someone or something. And we will sacrifice food, clothing, we'll starve. I've had kids run away from homeless shelters in -30 without shoes on because they're running to something, right? And it's always the feeling, even if it's horrific and they're going through abuse, but they feel loved. They feel like they belong to something or someone that is family, that is filling a void in their life because they've been neglected, or they just are so desperate to feel that love. All of us have that in us, but with kids, you just have to understand their prefrontal cortex isn't developed. There are things that are going on where that to us sounds outrageous, but you have to remember at the core of it, it's about the feeling that gives them of belonging somewhere. And I think we miss it a lot with boys too, because let's say you have a girl come to school, right? And we have the training, we know the contact, and we actually have a mandated report, right? All the things. And maybe it's because we're like, boy, that girl has her hair and nails done. She's got 2 cell phones. Like, we know she doesn't come from a home. Someone's picking her up from school, you know, that's grooming. Someone's grooming or recruiting this girl. Okay. You have a boy show up in the same situation. Maybe he's got a new haircut, J's on his feet, very expensive shoes, 2 cell phones. The assumption I would argue we would make is he stole that. Where did that kid steal that from? That's just what I believe is still happening too, where we miss some of that grooming, and that's happening with boys as well. Which is just a societal thing, right? It's just to kind of check our, I guess, bias in terms of what trafficking should look like or what it does look like. And I think a lot of people assume that male victims have to be gay, but my understanding is a lot of the time, well, actually not my experience is a lot of the time they actually are heterosexual males, but they're still groomed into trafficking and have to have sex with males. And then you think about what that does to the psyche of someone who's still developing, then that role confusion identity phase of life, right? And so talk about that shame of coming forward. And, you know, there's so much different dynamics in terms of boy victims too, and in terms of the trauma and stuff to consider. But yeah, that's my other rabbit hole.
We have so many rabbit holes here, Melissa.
Gosh.
But boys, when they tell me here in New York that, you know, the fastest growing demo law enforcement are boys, and boys are bringing in the most money, sometimes 3 and 4 times the amount of money from, you know, a girl the same age.
Interesting. Yeah.
It is, you know, it's something I think we need to talk about.
Absolutely.
And constantly, and open that up, no matter how tough everybody seems to think this is. I don't know. Let me ask you about the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, because you're part of that, the Advocacy Network. What does true advocacy look like for families? And I'm not talking about, you know, pamphlets. You know what I mean? Like, what is true advocacy?
Well, I think it's I don't like when people say giving them a voice, because they all have a voice. I think it's helping empower their voice. I think it's helping stand alongside of them to know that somebody gets their struggle and is on their side and is going to fight for them. Whether that fight is out loud, right? Doing a lot of like what you're doing in Washington, or if that's a fight to get the right provider, the right resource. If it's just someone to listen to them, right? And actually care, have expertise. Maybe it's someone who gives them some education. I think advocacy for families, I'm always it's whatever that means to them. And so I think it could be very different from one person to the next, but advocacy in general is just helping them get to where they want to go, and giving them the confidence and giving them the support and the team that they need to do that, regardless of what it is. And I think with kids, where I struggle with some of the advocacy piece is they turn this magic age of 18 and all of a sudden we don't advocate anymore. And it's like, well, now they're a prostitute. Now they're choosing it. Now they're just a deadbeat adult, and they're a drug addict, and they're homeless. Right. 5 years ago when they were a child, we cared about them. And then all of a sudden they turned 18 and it's like, oh, no more trauma, no more, you know, I should know how to support myself. I should know independent living skills. I should forget everything that ever happened to me and just adult with no skills and no one to help me through that. And so to me, it's also the argument of like, once they're 18, how do we continue to advocate for these victims and understand that for most of them, some type of trauma or victimization did start when they were children. And so not forgetting, right, that started before that age, and continuing the advocacy into adulthood.
Wow. I'm glad you brought that up, because that's another rabbit hole.
I know it. Tell me.
Or just, you know, we have a lot of, with the foster care here, I have worked with people who don't even know each other. Melissa, they've all told me the same story. They've
Mhm.
been re-victimized as a child coming through that. They've been re-traumatized,
Mhm.
re-trafficked. I hear it all the time. So that whole system's not working. Not to mention, I was dropped off in the Walmart parking lot with a brown paper bag,
Yeah.
and then I'm like, what? This is
Mhm.
unacceptable
Yeah.
in America. It's just unacceptable anywhere, but it's unacceptable. What would you, because let me just ask you, so you're calling for system change, right?
Mhm.
We are. What policies, whether it's local or state or federal, what do you believe enables all of this? What do we need to change right now? I know it's another big question kind of thing. But what should we do policy wise right now?
I think for one, stop the conversation around legalization of prostitution. I think that's a band-aid, and I personally um, disagree with it. Personal opinion, based on all the people I've worked with. I so I would say stop. If it were up to me, I would say stop going down that rabbit hole of like advocating for those types of things versus getting to the root of it. And I think policy needs to focus more around prevention. But like you said, not just throwing money places, like being really purposeful about next steps and what the plan is with the funding and how that's going to target every kid in America, not just here and there, But I think I think so much can be done on a local level because I also think every community is different. And so giving communities the capacity and ability to make those decisions based on what they need right where they live, because in rural North Dakota where I grew up, where we're surrounded by reservations, that's going to look different than New York City in terms of where that funding should be dedicated, what policies are going to make a big difference. But I think at the core of it, some type of policy around uniform response to trafficking, right, and to follow best practices that are out there for it, and focus the conversation more around how to prevent it in the first place versus let's throw a band-aid on it and just say we can legalize it and move on with our life. We know that down this rabbit hole, people are still victimized constantly, and that doesn't take away the problem of the market of people being sold for sex and raped and abused. But with labor trafficking, I think that's a whole different rabbit hole, right? And I think there's been some good change with like the T visas. I don't, to be honest, don't know where that's at now, but that was a beautiful thing we used with victims of labor trafficking to work on their case or just be able to stay here and get a T visa while things were being investigated, or just to allow them to be here on that trafficking visa. And so that program, I think, was imperative to the labor trafficking side. And it also required Homeland Security to work with us to help support those victims. And I think that gave victims a trustworthy relationship with someone in law enforcement that they saw as the threat, right, to deportation or to not wanting to work with them. And so I just think things like that were massive in terms of making some good strides in the space on the labor trafficking side.
Yeah, I like that. And I also like that because I hear a lot, I don't trust law enforcement. They didn't help me. I'm afraid to go
Mm,
to them, blah, 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 blah. Bringing them together to know that there's
yeah,
some really good law enforcement, right? That
yeah.
wants to help and do something. So we're opening up like those relationships. At least I'm working on that kind of thing as well, that there is help
Amazing. Yeah.
around. For people watching, let's finish up with this. But promise me before I say we finish up that we will have a part 2 and a part 3, and we'll make the
Please.
time, because there's so much and so much is changing. And I feel like
Yeah.
now every day it's really like things are happening, right? We need to keep talking about this. But I want to finish up with Melissa, for people watching who say this is too big, because I hear this a
Mhm.
lot.
Yeah, I bet.
I don't know what to start. Give us I'm going to say the average citizen. I don't like the word average, but regular warrior out there. Where can they start? How can they become that warrior? What would you recommend, one or two things to them?
Um, Pushing back on the victim blaming mentality. I think in
Mhm.
general, it's some awareness around personal bias, some awareness around how we view victims in general. I think some of that can help just having the right conversations, especially within your home. And maybe it's not that you have a kid, but your friend does, right? Or what have you. And so I think there, and then I always tell people to start locally. Just do you
Yeah.
have a statewide task force that either is through like your attorney general's office or through the Office for Victims of Crime federal funds, or do you have, where Can you turn locally to ask what they need? And there's a lot of need. And it might not be that you volunteer to work with victims, because that can further exploit victims. And I'd always question a little bit about what's going on there if that's the case. So if you're looking to work with victims in a volunteer capacity, I would say that might not necessarily happen, but there are other beautiful ways, whether you make hope bags full of hygiene products, whether you dedicate or donate some funding each year, whether you help set up for a human trafficking conference, whether you, right? I mean, there's so many other ways we can give back and be involved, or also just get proper education on what trafficking actually looks like in your community. And starting with those local responses, I think is a great place. I think for people in the work, one of the things I also do is that wellness. We've talked a little bit about burnout, wellness, vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue, and to really just, like we say when we fly, put the mask on yourself before assisting others. We're going to have so much more success with the teams we work on and with the victims if we take care of ourselves, because this is hard, traumatic work and we're all impacted by it. It makes us human. Doesn't mean you can't do the job, but we have to take care of ourselves to help victims to the best of our capabilities. And so to take time out to do that.
I mean, excellent. Well, first of all, Melissa, I want you training every single person across the United States. You'll have to take your wellness vitamins, because you really disseminate the information and explain things very easy to understand. And the goal always at the Warriors is educating, resources, spreading. And you know what? If somebody listening, you just share our discussion, that's good enough. Because I always say you can just do one little thing. You can go to the dollar store and buy like a bunch of socks or one pair of socks. Everybody, I'm very adamant about this, Melissa, now, like everybody must and can do something, because it can happen to you. And that's what I mean. It can happen to your child, your grandchild, or to you. So we all have to step up. So Melissa, any final words before I let you go, even though I don't want to let you go? Any final words?
Well, no, I'm excited for part 2 and 3. To your point, just listen, share, reach out if there's anything I can help you with or questions I can answer. I'm here as a resource for anybody. So I appreciate you giving us a space to talk about these things. It makes my heart happy, my advocate heart very happy.
Come on now, you're the expert, but I want to really thank you. I'm not kidding, from the bottom of my heart for joining us, for taking the time, and also your incredible life-saving work that you're doing. You have dedicated yourself. You're protecting vulnerable kids. You're helping with law enforcement. You're helping everybody understand what this is. And you really embody, in my opinion, no, that's not my opinion. You do embody, I got to take that back, the real spirit of the warrior. We're peaceful, loving warriors. We want everybody to rise up in their own, home and community and share this information and get on board with us. And we are just so honored at the Warriors to stand alongside you in this critical, I call it a critical and crucial mission, right, of educating everybody. And I want to speak to you now. You're going to be stuck with me, Melissa.
That's okay.
We have a lot more to speak about. So we will speak again soon. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Melissa. We'll talk again soon.